Music theory with OneNote. Negative modal distance versus inverse intervals, looking at the minor modes, including the Aeolian mode, otherwise known as the minor scale, the Dorian mode, the Phrygian mode. We're even throwing in the Locrian mode, which is more of a diminished mode, but it's kind of closer to the minor mode side of things. So get ready and some coffee, because although we're just playing with OneNote, it's a beautiful note. You're not required to, but if you have access to it and would like to follow along, we're currently in the OneNote file of Modal Node System, MNS Presentation 1235, OneNote, negative modal distance versus inverse intervals, minor modes, and Locrian. List of presentations over here. We plan on adding plenty more to it shortly, however. Also note, within this OneNote presentation, we could spend all of our time on the music theory side of things, but we also have a similarly numbered and named presentation where we build these tables in Excel, practicing our Excel skills, our music skills, and our table visualization all at the same time. We're going to be continuing on with our discussion of intervals, going in the counterclockwise or going down in pitch directionally, which has a particular problem with the normal interval notation. We're going to be discussing this with the minor modes this time, as well as the Locrian. Before we do, let's remember what our objective is. We want to be navigating around the fretboard as optimally as possible, not letting the terminology throw us off, but using the terminology towards our end goal of that navigation. We want to visualize the fretboard as a map of the territory, like the world, like the globe, having 7 continent or destination locations on it. The non-destination locations, like the oceans, we go through them to get to the destination locations. We can then see if we're above the fretboard, our head is above this low or heavy E string, the one closest to the ceiling. The fretboard can be spinning around like the world, 12 degrees of rotation that we're going to assign it, aligning to the 12 notes in the musical alphabet. We're going to be working on the 4th degree of rotation, that being the collection of notes related to the key of C major, 7 of them. Remembering, however, that if we went to C sharp, or D, or E, the collection of 7 notes would be relatively the same, meaning the whole thing would be shifting up like the planet rotating around. Therefore, once we know the collection of notes, we no longer want to be naming it by the note names, but rather by the continent name equivalent, which would be the numbers for a Nashville number system that are permanent numbers, which is basically a modal system, which means the 1 would be the Ionian, the 3 would be the Phrygian, the 2 would be the Dorian, and so on and so forth. Those are the things that stay constant. Now remember, the naming convention has a problem because it's going to use scale degrees, which messes up the optimal way to visualize the fretboard. So remember, that's going to be direction. So what do we want? We want to be able to explain exactly where I'm going, what I'm doing, to someone else that needs to drive somewhere. We're giving driving directions. We only have directionality of basically going forward and backwards. Now note, on a fretboard, you can also say you're going up directionally and down, but pitch-wise, we're still going basically forwards or backwards if we think about a note number line, or we're going clockwise or counterclockwise if we're talking about a clock face type of situation. In other words, it's not like a normal map, like if you're playing Zelda, in which case I can get from North America here to Asia multiple ways. I can go around this way, or I can go straight across. No, we're talking about more of a racetrack, where all I need to tell someone is directionality, forwards or backwards, clockwise or counterclockwise, and distance, which we can measure in 2 fundamental ways, one being the note distance, the second being the 7-note distance, which I would call the modal distance. So if we compare our continent here, if we're on Africa over here, the 3rd continent, and we go up to the 6, how far away is that? Well, continent to continent, we go around the block, around the track, clockwise, 1, 2, 3. I would call that the 3rd modal half step. But we usually think of scale degrees, which makes that the one. I have to rename Africa to like Asia or whatever. 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth scale degree. So you see the scale degree is a problem because I can't go backwards, right? Because if I go backwards, it's going to be negative 1, 2, 3, 4 modal half steps. But if I make a scale degree, it would be negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But we don't usually see scale degrees going in the reverse direction. That's going to be the problem. So what I'd like to do is think about a system where I can easily go forwards and backwards on the fretboard and bridge that into the current system. So what have we done in the past? We've got our notes in the musical alphabet. We picked the 7 notes in the key of C by applying our formula, which is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, back home. 7 notes that are going to be in our key. And then we looked at the 1 octave going forwards, and we looked at the normal naming convention, which is based off of the major scale. And then we also looked at the inverse of them. So we want to continue this time thinking about going directionally backwards. Now remember, the inverse and like this idea of a mirror inverse are similar, meaning if I'm on this G and I go to the C, then that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up. If I go from the C back to the G, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, negative 5 backwards. So you can think of that as the inverse going this way, but usually it's not said as a negative 5. We're going to say 12 minus 5 is 7. So 7 note away would be a perfect fifth, even though I'm going negative 5. So I want to think then a perfect fifth is either 7 forward, 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 5 between here, 6, 7, or negative 5 backwards. If I'm on this note, then, and I'm just going backwards, then basically, again, I want to see that directionally and just think about the negative distance, 1, 2, and then a negative 5 up this way. And think about how I can name that directionally. Again, one way is to take the inverse direction. But we're going to be moving on to the modal idea and compare this to what I think would be the most clear way to do things if we were to do them from scratch. All right, so let's start on the Aeolian mode because that's going to be the minor mode. So these are going to have more differences in terms of what's going to be in the key than the main major mode. So we're going to start off with a 2-note back. So let's say we go, we're going to go 2 notes back, negative 2. So negative 2 notes back is going to be in a modal range of an AX modal range. And it's going to be a 5-6 modal range. And here's the distance. Let me get back into my thought process here. So how are we going to do this? We're going to say this is going to be the Aeolian, which is going to be, let's choose this one. And let's say we go, so we're going to go back 2. So if we go back 2, we get to here. So you can see that would be negative 2 steps backwards, and it would be negative 1 modal half step backwards, which you would think would be the negative 2nd scale degree, but we don't usually have scale degrees. So what do we typically call it? If I go 2 back, we'd have to say, well, that would be like going 2 minus 12 minus 2 or 10 forward, and we have to just know that that would be a 7 note away minor 7, and therefore the minor 7 could be 10 forward or negative 2 backwards. See, this makes more sense, however, because I could say that we have an AX modal range, a 6-5 modal range. I could go forwards or backwards with the modal range, clockwise or counterclockwise. We're looking counterclockwise this time, which would be negative 2 notes back from the Aeolian node, which would be a negative 1 modal half step back. Remember that negative flows through, I'm imagining, so I don't have to put 2 negatives. And so we're trying to make it a little bit more simple or compact of a notation that way. And then that going clockwise would then be, of course, a 10 note away from the Aeolian node, 6 modal half step, which would be the 7th scale degree, as we can see here, 10 note away minor 7. So in other words, if I was going on the other side from here and I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, we get there. And if I look at the modal half steps, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which would mean the scale degree, if I made that the 1, would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th scale degree. So you see, this system, kind of makes more sense, of course, is the point. But we want to be able to bridge the gap between it and the current system as best we can as well. All right, so let's do the next one. So the next one, we're going to go up to here. We're going to go and let's see if I can just see it on this one. We're going to say it's a -5. Let's just pull it from here. I can see it. We're going a -4. So a -4 backwards. So let's say we're going to go down here and say, all right, it's a -4 backwards. So if I go here, it's going to be from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, -4 backwards. That's going to be an AY modal range, even though I'm going right to left, right? Because I could go clockwise or counterclockwise on the modal range. It's going to be 1, 2 modal steps backwards, which you would think would be the -3rd scale degree. But we don't have scale degrees. If I was to think about it from 3 steps back, then what would it be? 4 steps back would be here. That then is going to be -4. If I went forward, 12 minus 4 would be 8. So therefore, 8, I have to just know, would be a -6. And therefore, the -6 could be either 8 forward or 4 back. But it makes more sense to do it this way. It's an AY modal range, a 6-4 modal range, which has a distance in the counterclockwise direction of a -4 from the Aeolian node, which would be a -2nd modal half step back. And if I went forward, then it would be 8 steps forward from the Aeolian node, and 7 minus 2 would be 5. You can see how it clockwise and counterclockwise makes sense, just like if you're going around the block, 12 notes or 7 steps. So in other words, if I went 8 notes forward here, from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, there we are. For modal half steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the 5th modal half step, which would be the 6th scale degree, if I make that, then the 1. So it'd be an 8 note away, minor 6 if I'm going forward. All right, let's remove this one. And let's say remove this one. And then we're going to go over here and go, and then remove this one. Okay. And then we're going to go to the next one up and say this is going to be an AP. So that's going to be, let's do this. And so we're going to say this is going to be -5 back. So let's do this over here just to get everything lined up. It's going to be -5 back, which will be that one. All right. So if we go back -5. So if I go back -5 from the Aeolian, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it lands me here. So that would be -1, -1, 2, 3, -3rd modal half step back, which you would think would be the -4th scale degree, but we don't have scale degrees. What we normally would say is if I go back 5, 12 minus 5 means I must have gone forward 7 if I just go clockwise. Therefore, that would be a perfect 5th, and a perfect 5th, therefore, could be up 7 or backwards 5. But it would be more clear if we did this, because then I can say it's an AP modal range, a 6-3 modal range. If we go counterclockwise from the A, that would be a -5 note away from the Aeolian node, -3rd modal half step. And that way, if I look at the other side, 12 minus 5 is 7, and 7 minus 3 is 4. So that would be a 7 note away from the Aeolian node, 4th modal half step, which would be a 5th scale degree. In other words, if I was on this A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to go forward, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4th modal half step forward, which would be the 6th scale degree, right? So that would be, wait a sec, 1, 2, 3, 4th, which would be the 5th scale degree. So that would then be a, right here, 7 note away, perfect 5th. All right, let's remove that one and remove this and go back on over here, remove that, boom. Next one. We're getting into rhythm here. We're getting into rhythm. We're going to say it's an AD All right, and so this is going to be -7 distance-wise. So -7, let's map it out over here. We're going -7. So if I go -7 back, counterclockwise, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we get to here. So that would be -1, 2, 3, 4th, -4th modal half step, which would be the -5th scale degree, but we don't really have negative scale degrees. So I'd have to say, well, if it was -7, 12 minus 7 would be +5, and just know that would be a 5 note away perfect fourth, which means the perfect fourth can be 5 forward or clockwise, or 7 backwards or counterclockwise. And it would be better, however, if we had something like this, which would mean it would be an AD modal range, a 6-2 modal range, which would be a -7 notes away from the Aeolian node, -4th modal half step, which would be the -5th scale degree. If we had scale degrees, and the 7 minus 12, 12 minus 7 would be 5, 7 minus 4 would be 3. So if we went clockwise, we can go 5 steps away from the Aeolian node, which would be the 3rd modal half step, which would be the 4th scale degree. So in other words, if I was here and I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 forward, it would be the 1, 2, 3 3rd modal half step, which would be the 4th scale degree. So once again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 forward. 5 forward would be a 5 note away perfect fourth under the normal naming convention. All right, let's remove this and keep it rolling, keep it rolling. We got a lot to do here. You got to go faster this time. Pick up the pace. Pick up the pace. All right, so this is going to be an AI. So that's going to be then a -9. So let's go over here. We're going -9 distance. And if I go -9 from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 brings me to here. So it's an AC modal range. And that's going to be a distance of -1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The -5th modal half step backwards, which you would think would be the -6th scale degree if they had scale degrees going backwards, but we don't. So we have to say -9 minus 12 would be a distance of 3, and just know that that would be a 3 note away minor third, and therefore the minor third could be 3 notes forward or 9 notes backwards. But it would be better if we said it was an AI modal range, a 6-1 modal range, which would be -9 steps or notes back from the Aeolian node, which would be -5 modal half steps back, which would be -6 scale degrees, and 12 minus 9 would be 9, 10, 11, 12 would be 3, and 5, 7 minus 5 would be 2. So it would be a 3 note away if I go clockwise from the Aeolian node, 2nd modal half step, which would be the 3rd scale degree. So if I go back on over here, we go up 1, 2, 3, we get to here. That would be 1, 2 modal half steps up, which would be the 3rd scale degree. So that would be a 3 note away minor third. Okay, so let's go ahead and remove this and remove this and remove this and otra vez. Next one, it's going to be a 10 note away. An AN is a 10 note away, so let's go ahead and put that over here. 10 notes back. We're going 10 notes back from here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lands me here. That's going to be an AN, an Aeolian to a Locrian modal range. It's going to be a -1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 modal half steps backwards, which would be a -7 scale degree if we had scale degrees, but we don't. So we have to say if I go back 10, I would be going 12 minus 10 forward 2 clockwise, which I just have to know is a 2 note away major second. Therefore, the major second could be going forward 2 or back 10. But I'd rather say that it's an AN modal range, a 6-7 modal range, which would be -10 notes back from the Aeolian node, which would be the -6 modal half step, which would be the -7th scale degree. And if I went forward, 12 minus 10 would be a 2 note away from the Aeolian node, 7 minus 6, 1st modal half step, which would be the 2nd scale degree. So in other words, if I was here and I went forwards, 1, 2, we get here, or 1st modal half step, which would be the 2nd scale degree. So it would be a 2 note forward which we would call a 2-note away a major second. All right, so let's go ahead and do the next one. Oh, it didn't give me the eraser. Give me the eraser. I'm erasing stuff. I'm not writing things. I'm erasing at the moment. Stick with me, OneNote. Try to keep up if you could. Try to keep up. All right. So now we're gonna say that what about the ones in the middle? We're landing in the ocean now. So let's say we go back 1 and we're gonna land in the ocean. So if I'm on the Aeolian node and I go back 1, I'm gonna call that the Mixolydian Ocean. We land in the Mixolydian Ocean. So that would be a negative 0.5 modal half step backwards, which you would think would be a negative 1.5 scale degree if there were scale degrees that were negative, and we don't have a 0.5 either going backwards. So if I go backwards 1, I have to say 12 minus 1 would be 11 forward. 11 forward, I just have to know is a major third. Therefore, a major 7. Therefore, a major 7 could be 11 forward or 1 backwards. But I'd rather say it's an A to an A negative, which is a 6 to a 5.5 modal range from a Nashville number system. That would be a negative 1 note back from the Aeolian node, which would be a negative 0.5 note back, which means if I went clockwise, it would be 12 minus 1 or 11 notes forward from the Aeolian node, and 12 minus 0.5 would be 6.5 modal half steps forward, which would be 7.5, you would think, for a scale degree, but we don't have scale degrees. We'll talk about that in a second. If I go forward, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, lands me in the Mixolydian Ocean. And if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and a half, 6.5 modal half steps forward, which you would think if I made that the 1 would be 7.5 scale degrees if we had scale degrees, but we don't. So what are we going to call it? We're going to call it a 7. It's an 11 note away major 7 from that standpoint. So we're going to then get rid of this, get rid of that, and get rid of this, and then get rid of that. All right, next one. So now we're going to go back 3. So let's go ahead and highlight this one over here. We're going back 3, boom, boom. So right there. So now if we go back 3, 1, 2, 3 notes back, lands me in the Lydian Ocean. We're in the Lydian Ocean. So that would be negative 1.5 modal half steps backwards, which would be negative 2.5 scale degrees if we had scale degrees and half steps, but we don't. So if I go back 3, that would be 12 minus 3 forward 9. So 9 would be a major 6. Major 6 could be 9 forward or 3 backwards, but I'd rather say it's an AX negative modal range, which is a 6 to a 4.5 modal range, which would be counterclockwise 3 steps from the Aeolian node, negative 1.5 modal half steps backwards, which would be negative 2.5 scale degrees if there were such things as negative scale degrees. And if I go forward, then we've got a 9 note away from the Aeolian node, and then 7 minus 1.5 is going to be a 5.5 modal half steps forward, which would be a 6.5 scale degree if we had 0.5s, which we don't. So we're going to think about that in a second. But we're going to say this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.5. Is that what I said over here? 8.5. Wait a second. Not 8.5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5, which would be a 6.5 scale degree. But we don't have scale degrees, so what do we call it? We call it a 9 note away major 6. All right, so we're going to say, let's erase this one. Where's my eraser? Stupid thing doesn't click sometimes. I think I'm too zoomed in for it, but I like to be this zoomed in. So let's do the next one. We're going to go 6 back. So what if we go 6 back? And I'm going to say, all right, we're going 6 back. So if I go 6 back from here, we're going to say it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, lands me in the Dorian Ocean. So that would be negative 1, 2, 3, negative third modal half step back 3.5 modal half step backwards, which would be 4.5 scale degrees backwards. If we had scale degrees, we don't, so we call that a -6. 12 minus 6 is still 6, so 6 forward was normally called a diminished fifth or an augmented fourth, so 6 backwards is going to also be a negative diminished fifth or augmented fourth. I'd rather call it an AP negative modal range, a 6 to a 2.5 modal range, a counterclockwise 6-note distance from the Aeolian node, a -3.5 scale degree distance. If I went forward, it would be 12 minus 6, or 6 notes forward clockwise from the Aeolian node, and 7 minus 3.5 would be 3.5 modal half steps forward, which would be 4.5 scale degrees if we had scale degrees. So we're going to, if we had 0.5s in the scale degrees going forward, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps forward, 1, 2, 3.5 modal half steps forward, and that would be 4.5 scale degrees if we had scale degrees, but we don't. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so we go 6. That would be a 6-note away diminished fifth, or sometimes it's going to be an augmented fourth. That's that funny interval. All right. Next one. Moving on up, we're going to say we have a -8 distance. Okay, -8 is going to be, so that's going to be then -8 from here to, we're going to say that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Lands me in the Ionian Ocean, which is going to be -1, 2, 3, 4.5 scale degrees, which would be -4.5 modal half steps, which would be -5.5 scale degrees if we had those, but we don't. So if I go back 8, we go 12 minus 8 would be forward 4, which I have to know is a 4-note away major third. Therefore, a major third could be going forward 4 or backwards 8. But I'd rather say we have an AD negative modal range, which is a 6 to a 1.5 modal range, which is going to be a counterclockwise 8-note distance from the Aeolian node, which would be a -4.5 modal half steps back. And if I go forward then on the clockwise direction, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 would be a 4-note away from the Aeolian node. 7 minus 4.5 would be a 2.5 modal half step forward, which would be a 3.5 scale degree if we had 0.5s in the scale degree, but we don't, so we'll get to that in a second. But that would be from here. 1, 2, 3, 4 lands me in the Ionian Ocean, and 1, 2.5 modal half steps forward. And if I made it a scale degree, you would think it would be 3.5 steps forward, but we don't typically have that. 1, 2, 3, 4. We have a 4-note away major third. Okay, let's do this. We're gonna do this and do this. Get rid of that. All right, next one. We're gonna say is a. Let's do this one up top. A -11. So we're going back 11 distance. So from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 lands me in the Aeolian Ocean. That's going to be a -1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6.5 modal half steps backwards, which you would think would be 7.5 scale degrees, but we don't have negative scale degrees, so we have to say -11. 12 minus 11 would be 1 step clockwise, which would be a minor second. Therefore, a minor second could be 1 forward or 11 backwards. But I'd rather say it's an AN negative modal range, which is a 6 to a 6.5 modal range, which would be 11 steps counterclockwise from the Aeolian node, which would be -6.5 modal half steps backwards. If I was to go clockwise, then 12 minus 11 would be 1 step forward from the Aeolian node. 7 minus 6.5 would be 0.5 steps forward, which you would think would be modal half steps forward, which you would think would be a 1.5 scale degree if you had 0.5s in the scale degree, which you don't. So instead, we call it a 1-note away minor second, right? Instead of a 1.5. So if I'm here and I go forward so if I go forward 1 step, that would be here, 1 note, or you would think of that as a 0.5 step forward, which would be a 1.5 scale degree, but we don't have 1.5 scale degrees. So once again, we call that then a 1 step forward, 1 note away minor second. All right, let's see if we could do some of these other ones at the same time, or we're just going to be pulling too much time. So let's go and say we can compare these other ones kind of together. So let's say, so these are going to be more similar to the Aeolian than the Locrian. So we'll do some more comparisons of these different scales and the intervals of them in a future presentation. But as we just look at each of these, we can kind of do the comparison now as well, meaning once we know the Ionian mode, which is the major scale, we compared the other major modes to it, and the other two major modes, which are the 4 and the 5, the Mixolydian and the Lydian, only have one interval each different than the major intervals. And then the minors is going to be one of the most different intervals. All the majors kind of get flipped to the minor except for the minor second. And then we can compare all of the other minor modes to it, including the Locrian, which is not exactly a minor mode because it also has a flat 5. But these two, the Dorian and the Phrygian, will only have one modal, one interval difference, and the Locrian will have most of the minor modes but also have a flat 5th in it. So let's see if we could do kind of these at the same time. So let's say we have the Dorian, Phrygian, and Locrian. Dorian, Phrygian, and Locrian. So let's say I'm going to see if I can erase this. How can we do this? How can we do this? We have the Dorian here, and then we have the Phrygian here, and then we have the Locrian here. And we're going to go backwards from each of those, and then the other side's over here. That's perfect. Let's do this one at a time. We're first going to think about going back one step, one note in the counterclockwise direction. So if we're on the Phrygian and we go back one note, we land in the Dorian Ocean. If we're on the Dorian, we go back one note, we land in the Ionian Ocean. If we're on the Locrian and we go back one note, we land in the Aeolian Ocean. So you can see we obviously don't land exactly in the same spot because we have different starting points, but they all land us in the ocean. That's why they're going to be similar modes. All right, so we would say that's going back 1 or 0.5 modal half steps, which you would think would be at 1.5 scale degrees, but we don't have scale degrees. Therefore, if we go back 1, normally we have to say, well, 12 minus 1 is 11 forward, and that would be a major 7. So a major 7 could be 11 forward or back 1. But I think it would be better if we look at it from the perspective first of the Dorian to say that we have a D negative modal range. That's going from a 2 to a 1.5 modal range, which has a distance, if I go counterclockwise, of a -1 from the Dorian node, a -0.5 modal half step backwards. If we look at the same thing from the Phrygian, it's going to go from the P to a P negative, which is a modal range of a 3 to a 2.5, meaning we're going back or counterclockwise one step, one note from the Phrygian node, which would be once again a -0.5 modal half step. So you can see, of course, these are the same kind of intervals or distances in the negative direction, but starting from a different point. So then we're going to go to the next one, which is going to be the Locrian. Not quite minor, crazier than minor, but similar. So it's going to be an N to an N negative modal range, or a 7 to a 6.5 modal range, going from one step back, note back, counterclockwise from the Locrian node, or -0.05 modal half steps backwards. So then if we were to go forwards then, if we go forwards, we're thinking we went 1 backwards, so it would be 11 forward, and then we'd have the 7 minus 0.5 would be 6.5 forward. So an 11 forward from the Dorian node, 6.5 modal half step, which you would think would be a 7.5 scale degree, but we don't have 0.5 scale degrees, so it's going to be a 7th scale degree, right? And that's what we're going to have over here, an 11 note away. It's going to be an 11 note away major 7. All right, next one, let's go here. We have an 11 note away from the Phrygian node, which would be a 6.5 modal half steps forward. And this one would, of course, then be an 11 note away from the Locrian node, or 6.5 modal half step forward. So in other words, if I scroll down, these three are the ones we're on this side, on the left side. And if we go to the right, our normal clockwise direction, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 gets me once again to the Dorian Ocean. Now notice if I look at the modal half steps, I don't have the same pattern. This is different than this. This is different than this, right? Because we don't have the same pattern of continents. But when we look at the modal half steps, counting them up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6.5 modal half steps up. We go from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6.5 modal half steps up, which you would think would be 7.5 scale degrees, right? And from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.5 modal half steps up. All right, let's erase this and do the next one. Otra vez, erase, otra vez, erase, and then otra vez. All right, so we're going to go to -2. So we're going to go -2 now, back. So let's say we go 2 notes back from each of these. So from the Phrygian, that lands me on the Dorian mode. So it's going to be a PD modal range. From the Dorian, it's going to go to the Ionian. That's a DI modal range. And from the Locrian, it's going to go to the Aeolian. So that's an NA modal range. So that means that we're going to go 1 modal half step back for each of them, which you would think would be the -2nd scale degree, but we don't have negative scale degrees. We usually would say if I go back 2, 12 minus 2 would be forward 10. Forward 10 would be a -7, therefore a -7 could be forward 10 or back 2. But I'd rather do something more like this, where we would say that we have a DI modal range from the perspective of the Dorian. Oh, I could still do this while I have, that's great, okay. From the perspective of the Dorian, it would be a 2-1 modal range, -2 notes back from the Dorian mode, which would be a -1 modal half step back, which you would think would be a -2 scale degrees, but we don't have the scale degrees. That's why we have to still think about it like if it's going clockwise. From the Phrygian, it would be a DP modal range or a 3-2 modal range. Once again, 2 steps back, this time from the Phrygian node, which would be a -1 modal half step back. Once again, just from a different node. And similarly, I don't need to do that. When I go to the Locrian over here, I should just be able to, no, I can't do it now. Now I messed it up. Now I need my eraser. All right, and I need to switch here and then go up, okay? So now we can see here that we have an NA modal range, which is going to be a 7-6 modal range, which would be once again -2 this time from the Locrian, -1 modal half step backwards. Now, if I go 1 modal half step backwards, it would be then 6 steps, 7 minus 1 or 6 forward. So that would be an NA modal range, also a 7-6 modal range, this time going forward 10 from the Locrian node, which would be a 6 modal half steps forward, which you would think would be the 7th scale degree. Similarly here, PD range, 3-2 range, it would be a 10 modal half step forward from the Phrygian node, which would be 10 notes forward from the Phrygian, which would be a 6 modal half step forward, which would be a 7th scale degree. And then we have this one, which would be a 10 notes forward from the Dorian node, which would be 6 modal half steps forward, 7th scale degree. So in other words, if I start from any of these going forward, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, we get here. And if I look at the distance in modal half steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th modal half step, which if I make this the 1/7 scale degree, again, the pattern's not the same, but the number of modal half steps is, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 modal half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 modal half steps. Okay, let's erase that out. Go to the next one, the next one, the next one. We're going to erase this, 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 this. We'll reveal the next bit. So I'm going to go up right there and go up to here. And then we're going to say, let's erase this and look at -3. So we're going to go -3 steps backwards. So if we go 3 steps back, 1, 2, 3, lands us in the Ionian Ocean. 3 steps back from the Dorian, lands us in the, well, not on the ocean, lands us on the Locrian. So we have a difference here. 3 steps back from the Locrian, lands us in the Mixolydian Ocean. So this is where the Dorian is different. The Dorian is the outlier. It's different from the minor mode and the other modes here, because there's always one interval different from the 2 minor modes, the Dorian and the Phrygian, from the Aeolian, which we'll do a comparison table for more formally later. But you can see here from the Phrygian, it would be -1.5 modal half steps backwards versus -2 modal half steps backward from the Dorian, -1.5 modal half steps backward from the Locrian. So you would think that would be a third scale degree, but we don't have really scale degrees going backwards. So if I go back 3, normally I'd have to say 12 minus 3, which would be 9 forward. 9 forward is a major 6th, so I just have to know that a major 6 could be 9 forward or 3 back. But I'd rather say from the Dorian node, it would be a DN modal range, a 2-7 modal range, back 3 from the Dorian node, and back 3 notes from the Dorian, which would be back 3 modal half steps counterclockwise. From the Phrygian node, we would have a PD negative modal range, a 3 to a 1.5 modal range. We would be going back 3 notes from the Phrygian, but this time it's only a 1.5 modal half step backwards, because it's going to land us in the ocean from the Phrygian if we go that same distance back from that point. And if we have the Locrian, it's an NA negative, going to land us in the ocean as well. It's a 7 to a 5.5 modal range. It's a -3 steps back from the Locrian mode, -1.5 modal half steps back. If I go 3 steps back, then it would be 9 steps forward. So now we're looking at this one. And so it would be 12 minus 3 is a 9 node away from the Locrian node. And then 7 minus 1.5 is a 5.5 modal half steps in the clockwise direction, which would mean you would think that the scale degree would be 6.5 from that point. But we don't have really 0.5s in the normal scale degree system. So similarly here, if I go -3 from the Phrygian, -1.5 modal half steps, then 12 minus 3 would be a 9 note clockwise from the Phrygian, and 7 minus 1.5 would be 5.5 modal half steps clockwise, which you would think would be 6.5 scale degrees. Here on the Dorian, we went back -3 half steps from the Dorian, which this time is -2 modal half steps, and therefore going forwards or clockwise would be a 9 note away still from the Dorian, but now it's going to be a 7 minus 2 or 5 note clockwise modal half step, which means you would think it would be the 6th scale degree for that one. So really, for that distance, normally we have a 9 note away major 6. All right. Next one. We'll bring this down, and we have this. Get rid of that. It won't let me do it. Now we're going to go back 4. So if we go back 4 from each of these, from the Phrygian, 1, 2, 3, 4 lands me on the Ionian. Go back 4 from the Dorian, 1, 2, 3, 4 lands me in the ocean, Aeolian Ocean. So we have a difference here again from the Locrian going back 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 is going to land me on the Mixolydian node. So the Dorian once again is the odd one out here. So we're going to say, all right, so that's great. So we would think it would be from the Phrygian, -1, 2 modal half steps backwards, which you would think would be the -3rd scale degree if we had those. But from the Dorian, it's a -1, 2.5 modal half steps backwards. Locrian, -1, 2 modal half steps backwards. Now, if we go 4 normally backwards, we'd have to say 12 minus 4 is 8 forwards, and then say, well, I know that that's going to be a minor 6, so the minor 6 could be 8 forward or 4 backwards. But I'd rather do something like this, where we'd say it's a dn negative from the perspective of the Dorian, which would be going from Nashville number system 2 to a 6.5, which would have a distance in the counterclockwise direction of a -4 from the Dorian node, -2.5 modal half steps, which you would think would be -3.5 scale degrees if we had those. From the perspective of the Phrygian, it would be a pi modal range, a 3-1 modal range, meaning we're going back 4 once again, this time from the Phrygian mode, but this time it's a -2 modal half steps backward, and it doesn't land us in the ocean. And if we do the same from the Locrian, then it would be an NX modal range, a 7-5 modal range, going -4 counterclockwise once again, this time though from the Locrian node, also a -2 modal half steps backwards or counterclockwise. So if I go -2 backwards, 7 minus 2 would be 7, 6, 5 forward. So we'd say, okay, that's going to be this one. So if I go clockwise, then it would be a 4 notes away from the Locrian node, which would be a 5th modal half step forward, which would be the 6th scale degree. Similarly here, it would be an 8 note forward from the Phrygian node, which would be, once again, a 5th modal half step forward, which would be a 6th scale degree. But this one being different because it was a 4 note away from the Dorian and a 2.5 modal half steps counterclockwise or backwards leads us to 8 notes away still going forwards, this time from the Dorian node, but this time it's a 4.5 modal half steps forward. Okay, so let's do the next one. So now we're going -5 steps. So -5 steps, okay. So from the Phrygian, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lands me on the Locrian. That's a PN modal range. From the Dorian, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lands me on the Aeolian. That's a DN modal range. And from the Locrian, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lands me in the ocean. So now we have a difference on the Locrian from the minor modes of the Phrygian and the Dorian, the Locrian, the odd one out. So we would say from a modal half step, -1, 2, 3, -3rd modal half step, which would be the -4th scale degree if we had negative scale degrees. From the Dorian, -1, 2, 3rd, -3rd modal half step backwards. And then from the Locrian, however, -1, 2.5 modal half steps backwards. Okay, so then if I was to look at it under the normal convention, -5, 12 minus 5, which would be 7 forward, I have to know that 7 forward would be a perfect 5th, and therefore a perfect 5th could either be 7 forward or 5 on the negative direction. I'd rather say, however, if looking at the perspective of the Dorian, it's a DA modal range, a 2-6 modal range, which would be a distance of counterclockwise 5 from the Dorian node and counterclockwise or -3 modal half steps. From the standpoint of the Phrygian, it would be a PN modal range, a 3-7 modal range, which would be once again -5 steps back counterclockwise from the Phrygian node this time, which would be a -3 modal half steps backwards. What about the Locrian? Locrian's going to be different this time. It would be at NX -7 to a 4.5, landing us into the ocean. It's still going to be -5 steps back from the Locrian node, but this time it's a -2.5 modal half steps back, which lands us in the ocean. If we say 7 minus 2.5, we're going to be getting to the 7 note away from the Locrian, 4.5 going forward or clockwise. Whereas on the PN here, we have the 5 -5p third, 7 minus 3 would be 4. So it would be a 7 note away from the Phrygian This time, though, it would be a 4 modal half steps forward or clockwise, which you would think would be the 5th scale degree. Here, similarly, we have a 7 node away from the Dorian node, 4th modal half step forward, which you would think would be the 5th scale degree. And over here, you'd say we can see already that it was the 7 node away perfect 5th, 7 node away perfect 5th. Okay, next one is 6 steps back. So now we're going to go 6 steps back. So if I'm over here, this is the weird one. That's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, lands us in the Aeolian Ocean. 6 from the Dorian. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, lands us in the Mixolydian Ocean. From the Locrian, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, lands us on the Lydian. So that's an NY modal range versus a P to an A plus or a P to an N minus, a D to an X plus or a D to an A minus, right? And for the steps back, it's going to be a negative 1, 2, 3 and a half modal half steps backwards. And this one's going to be 1, 2, 3 and a modal half step backwards. And this one is 1, 2, 3, just straight up 3 modal half steps backward, which you would think would be 4 scale degree, the 4th scale degree, but we don't have scale degrees going backwards. So normally I'd have to say if it's going backwards 6, 12 minus 6 is forward 6, clockwise 6. And if 6 going forward is usually a diminished 5th or an augmented 4th. And so the that diminished 5th could either be 6 forward or in essence 6 backwards. But I'd rather say if it's from the Dorian, it's a dA negative, right? It's a dA negative. And that would be a 2 to a 5.5 modal range, which would be a distance of negative 6 from the Dorian node, which would be a negative 3.5 modal half steps backwards. If I'm going from the Phrygian, it would be a PN negative, which would be a 3 to a 6.5 modal range, which would once again have a distance of negative 6 notes counterclockwise from the P node, which would be a negative 3.5 modal half step backwards. From the Locrian, however, it would be an NY modal range, a 7-4 modal range, landing us on a continent, which would be negative 6 backwards from the Locrian node, negative 3rd modal half step backwards. If I take 7 minus 3, 7, 6, 5, 4, it would be clockwise 6 notes forward from the Locrian node, which would be a 4th modal half step forward, which would be the 5th scale degree. Here, though, it would be 6. We had 6 going backwards and 3.5 backwards. 7 minus 3.5 is 3.5. So we would have going clockwise 6 notes away from the Phrygian mode, 3.5 modal half steps forward. Similarly here, we would have 6 notes clockwise or forward from the Dorian node, 3.5 modal half steps forward, which would be something like 4.5 scale degrees, which we already saw up here. Notice this one's the weird one, though, because it's either going to be a diminished 5 or an augmented 4, typically. All right, let's go 7 backwards. So if we go 7 backwards from the Phrygian, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we land on the Aeolian. 7 back from the Dorian. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we land on the Mixolydian, so it would be a DX modal range. 7 back from the Locrian. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We land on the Phrygian, so it would be an NP modal range. Distance would be, in terms of modal half steps, negative 1, 2, 3, negative 4th modal half step, which you would think would be the negative 5th scale degree if you had negative scale degrees. Here, negative 1, 2, 3, 4th modal half step back. From here, negative 1, 2, 3, 4th modal half step backwards. But normally, we'd have to say if I go back 7, 12 minus 7 would be forward 5, which I have to know is a 5 node away perfect 4th. That means that the perfect 4th could go 5 forward or 7 backwards. I'd like to say it's a DX modal range, a 2-5 modal range, which means a distance of negative 7 counterclockwise from the Dorian node, negative 4 modal half steps counterclockwise. From the Phrygian, it would be a PA modal range, a 3-6 modal range, counterclockwise distance of negative 7 from the Phrygian node, once again, negative 4th modal half step backwards. From the Locrian, similarly, it would be an NP modal range, a 7-3 modal range, a -7 from the Locrian node, -4th modal half step backwards. If I go 4 backwards, then I could go forward or clockwise 7 minus 4, which would be 3. So that would be a 5-note forward, which would still be an NP 7-3 modal range, 5-note forward from the Locrian node, which would be the 3rd modal half step, which would be the 4th scale degree. So here it would be a PA modal range, 7 backwards from the Phrygian mode, -4 modal half steps backwards would be still a PA modal range if I went clockwise, which would be a 5-note away from the Phrygian node, 3rd modal half step forward, which would be the 4th scale degree. Similarly, from the Dorian, still be a DX modal range, a 2-5 modal range. It would be 5 notes forward from the Dorian node, which would be 3 modal half steps forward, which would be the 4th scale degree, which once again would be typically a 5-note away perfect 4th from the perspective of a scale degree. Let's go 8 backwards. So we go 8 in the negative direction. So from the Phrygian, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lands us in the Mixolydian Ocean. From the Dorian, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lands us in the Lydian Ocean. From the Locrian, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lands us in the Dorian Ocean. So they're all similar because they're all minor modes or diminished modes, and they're going to all land us in the ocean. If we go 8 back, they all have the same negative modal half steps, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4.5 modal half steps back, which would be, you would think, 5.5 scale degrees if we had negative scale degrees or half scale degrees. This one has a different pattern, but it's the same number, right? 1, 2, 3, 4.5 modal half steps back. 1, 2, 3, 4.5 modal half steps back. Normally, we would say, well, if I go 8 steps back, I'd have to say 12 minus 8 would be 4 forward, which I'd have to know is a 4-note away major third, and therefore the major third could go forward 4 or 8 back. But I'd rather say it's from the perspective of the Dorian, a DX negative modal range, or a 2 to a 4.5 modal range, or a -8 steps counterclockwise from the Dorian mode, which would be a -4.5 modal half step counterclockwise. From the Phrygian, it would be a PA negative modal range, a 3 to a 5.5 modal range, going counterclockwise, -8 notes. From the Phrygian node would be -4.5 modal half steps backwards. Similarly, from the Locrian, it would be an NP negative modal range, a 7 to a 2.5 modal range, a -8 steps back from the Locrian node, which would be a 4.5, a -4.5 modal half steps backwards. If we go backwards, -4.5 modal half steps, then we would go forward at 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 2.5. So we go 8, 12 minus 8 would be 4, and 7 minus 4.5 would be 2.5, right? That's right, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so that means we would go clockwise 4 notes from the Locrian node, which would be a 2.5 modal half step forward to get to the same spot, which you would think would be a 3.5 scale degree. Similarly here, we're going to say that we have then a 4-note forward from the Phrygian node, which would be a 2.5 modal half step forward, which you would think would be a 3.5 scale degree if we had 0.5 scale degrees. Similarly here, notice the difference in the naming. I'm calling it a dy plus versus a dx minus, but it's the same here, a 2 to a 4.5 modal range, and it's going to be 4 notes clockwise from the Dorian node, 2.5 modal half steps forward, which you would think would be 3.5 scale degrees, but no, it's going to be a 4-note away major third, rounds up to the major third. Okay, next one. 9 steps back. What if we go 9 steps backwards? Now, from the Phrygian, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lands us on the Mixolydian node. That's a PX modal range. From the Dorian, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lands us on the Lydian. That's a DY modal range. From the Locrian, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lands us on the Dorian, an ND modal range. So they all have a similar distance in that if we talk about negative modal half steps, negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, negative fifth modal half step, which would be the negative 6 scale degree if we had negative scale degrees. This one would be negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, negative fifth modal half step. This one would be negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, negative fifth modal half step. But normally we'd have to say, well, if I go back 9, I've got to go 12 minus 9 would be forward 3, which I just have to know is a 3 note away minor third. Therefore, the minor third could be going forward 3 or back 9. I'd rather say, hey, look, if we're going from the perspective of the Dorian, it's a dy modal range, a 2-4 modal range, meaning counterclockwise distance 9 notes from the Dorian node, counterclockwise or negative fifth modal half step backwards. If we're looking at the Phrygian, similarly, it'd be a px modal range, a 3-5 modal range going counterclockwise or negative 9 notes from the Phrygian node, which would be a negative fifth modal half step backwards. Similarly, Locrian mode would be an ND modal range, a 7-2 modal range, or negative 9 notes counterclockwise or backwards from the Locrian node, negative 5 modal half steps backwards. If I go 5 back, 7 minus 5 would be 2 forward. So it's 5, 6, 7 would be 2 forward. Wait, is that 5? Yeah, that's right, 2 forward. So it'd be an ND again, which would be a 3 note clockwise from the Locrian node, which would be a second modal half step forward or the third scale degree. Similarly here, the px 3, 5, negative 9 from the Phrygian mode, negative 5, would be still a px 3-5 modal range, but this time going clockwise 3 notes from the Phrygian node, 2 modal half steps forward, which would be a third scale degree. The dy 2-4 modal range, negative 9 from the Dorian node, negative 5 would be a still dy 2-4 modal range, which would be 3 notes clockwise from the Dorian node, 2 modal half steps forward, which would be the third scale degree right here, 3 note away minor third. Okay, we're close, but no cigar yet. We don't have the cigar yet. And you know what I came here for? I came here for the cigar. So close, but no cigar is not good enough. If I don't have that cigar, it's not even worth being here. Negative 8 or 10. We're going 10 back. Going back 10. So we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Lands us in the Lydian Ocean. Going back from the Dorian, it's going to take us to the same spot. Let's just jump over here. It's going to be here. So that's going to be a dp modal range. This would be a p to a y plus or a p to an x minus modal range. And this one's going to be going into the ocean once again. So now the Dorian is the odd one out. And this would be an n to a I plus modal range or a D minus modal range. The distance would be in modal half steps, negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5 modal half steps backwards, which you would think would be 6.5 scale degree backwards if we were doing scale degrees. And this one would be negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, negative 6 modal half steps backward. This one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5 modal half steps backwards. Normally, we'd have to say if I go back 10, then 12 minus 10 would be forward 2. Just know that 2 would be a 2 note away major second. Therefore, the major second could be 2 notes forward or 10 notes backwards. I'd rather say if I'm looking at the perspective of the Dorian that I'm measuring from, that it's a dp modal range, a 2-3 modal range, counterclockwise direction would be 10 notes from the Dorian node, and then counterclockwise or negative 6 modal half steps backwards. From the perspective of the Phrygian, it would be a px negative modal range, a 3 to a 4.5 modal range, meaning we would go counterclockwise or negative 10 steps or notes from the Phrygian node, which would be a negative 5.5 modal half steps counterclockwise. What about the Locrian? It would be an ND negative, a 7 to a 1.5 modal range, which would have a counterclockwise distance in notes of 10 from the Locrian node, negative 5.5 modal half steps backwards. If I go negative 5.5 modal half steps backwards, 7 minus 5.5 would be 1.5 forward. That would be a clockwise distance to get to the same spot. of a 2-note away from the Locrian node, 1.5 modal half step forward, which you would think would be a 2.5 scale degree if we had 0.5 scale degrees. Similarly, here it's now going to be a py plus, which is the same as a px minus, which is a 4.5 modal range, which is going to have a 2-note forward or clockwise from the Phrygian node, 1.5 modal half steps forward, which you would think would be 2.5 scale degree. This one, however, is just a dp modal range, a 2-3 modal range, and because we didn't end up in the ocean, we had a -10 from the Dorian node, negative modal 6 modal half steps. We now have a 2-note away from the Dorian node. 7 minus 6 is 1 modal half step forward, which would be the second scale degree. From a scale degree standpoint, we would call that a 2-note away major second. All right, one more. All right, -11 backwards. Finally, -11. So obviously here from the Phrygian, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 gets us to the Lydian. That's a py modal range. If I go from the Dorian, it's going to land us over here in the Dorian Ocean. And if I go from the Locrian, it's going to go to the Ionian. So we have the Dorian here being the odd one out on this one. And we're going to say how many modal half steps back from the Phrygian. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 modal half steps back from the Dorian. It's going to be a -1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.5 modal half steps back, which you would think would be -7.5 scale degrees if we had scale degrees. From the Locrian, -1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 modal half steps back. Okay, so normally if I say I go backwards 11, I'd have to say 12 minus 11 would be going forward 1. That would be a minor second. Therefore, the minor second could be going forward 1 or back 11. But if I'm measuring from the Dorian, I'd rather say it's a D to a P negative modal range, a 2 to a 2.5 modal range, meaning I go 11 steps counterclockwise or negative from the Dorian mode, which would be counterclockwise or -6.5 modal half steps. From the standpoint of the Phrygian, it would be a py modal range, a 3-4 modal range, which means we would be going -11 steps counterclockwise from the Phrygian node, which would be -6 counterclockwise modal half steps from that point. From the Locrian, it's an ni modal range, a 7-1 modal range, and -11 steps back from the Locrian node, which would be a negative or counterclockwise 6 from 6 modal half steps back. So to go forward then, if it's 6 back, 7 minus 6 would be 1 forward. So going forward, it would be a 1-note away from the Locrian node, 1 modal half step in the clockwise direction, which would be the second scale degree. However, here, it's going to be a py modal range, a 3-4 modal range still, and it's going to be once again a 1-note clockwise or forward from the Phrygian node, 1 modal half step forward, which would be the second scale degree. This one, however, from the Dorian is a DD plus, which is going to be a 2 to a 2.5 modal range, 1 note forward from the Dorian mode, which would be a 0.5 modal half step forward, which you would think would be a 1.5 scale degree if we had scale degrees, but we call those a 1 note away minor second. Now note, just to clarify this one, this one looks like odd because the Dorian is kind of the odd one out, but what really happens is with this major second is that the major second, you will recall, is in the minor mode as well. So if we include the Aeolian, you could see that the Aeolian also does not have this 11 note back situation. 11 note back, or which would be 1 note forward situation. It's going to be the Phrygian that has that one, which is going to be kind of weird. It's kind of an odd one out. And then the Locrian, which isn't exactly a minor mode. It's kind of more minor than the main minor. So what I'm trying to say here is the Dorian looks like it's kind of like the odd man out here. But really, you can compare the Dorian and the Phrygian to the Aeolian, which would be the classic thing to do. And they're each going to have 1 interval that is different. And then the Locrian is going to be kind of closer, not so much to the Aeolian than to the Phrygian, the really more minor situation, and have a flat 5. We'll talk more about those comparisons of all the intervals in a future presentation. You can kind of see the comparisons with this table, but this table is really trying to just get the measurement concept right, and it might be better to do a different table to kind of line up all the intervals side by side so that we get all the different flavors lined up side by side. So we'll do that later.